You're tuned in to Tax Talk DC with the Office of Tax and Revenue. Join us as we offer insights on the city's tax initiatives, share important resources for residents, and get answers to some of your most pressing tax questions. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Valentine.
Hello, and welcome to Tax Talk DC, where we break down the tax topics that matter most to you. I'm your host, Jennifer Valentine, and we've got another great episode lined up for you today. Joining me is a dedicated and knowledgeable member of the Office of Tax and Revenue's Audit and Criminal Investigation Administration, Supervisory Criminal Investigator John Fowler. We'll be talking with John about common filing issues, why it's so important to use a legitimate tax preparer, and how to protect your refund from fraudsters. We hope these important topics will contribute to a smooth and stress-free tax filing season for our listeners. So, let's get into it, DC. Hi, John. Thanks so much for joining us to share important information during the tax filing season. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
All right. Now, before we get into today's discussion, can you start by sharing a bit about yourself, your background, and your current role at OTR?
And how long is our segment? No, I spent over 3 decades in federal service. I was a MP in the military, a police officer, a special agent with U.S. Customs, special agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, executive and assistant inspector general for investigations with TIGDA, which is the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, who has oversight responsibilities and investigative responsibilities for crimes committed against IRS employees in their official roles, protection of their infrastructure, and also programs.
Okay. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your previous background. How about your current role at OTR?
I've been here a little over 2 years, and as the chief of the Criminal Investigation Division, I have responsibility for 3 primary sections in the division. One has to do with adjustments of tax returns that need to be perfected to be able to be processed. The other has to do with criminal investigations of violations of the criminal statute and the DC Code. And probably more important to our discussion today, our Return Integrity Unit, which reviews and screens refund claims for potential fraud or erroneous payments, and also deals with taxpayers to assist them in obtaining their refunds based on errors or additional needed information.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. We'll be talking mostly about that today. That sets us up nicely to move into one of our main topics of discussion for today, which is the importance of using a legitimate tax preparer. Let's start by explaining to our listeners what we mean by legitimate, right? Perhaps describe the main characteristics of a legitimate preparer and maybe identify some red flags that we should look out for when we're choosing a preparer.
Sure. Legitimate preparers often do not promote the ability to obtain a large refund prior to reviewing your income tax return. Most tax return preparers are professional, honest, and provide excellent service to their clients. However, dishonest and unscrupulous tax return preparers who file false income tax returns do exist. You should always check your return for errors to avoid potential financial and legal problems. Remember, you are responsible for ensuring your tax returns that are filed are accurate. It's kind of like, you remember the old adage, Jennifer, about if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, taxpayers really should take that message, that adage to heart when selecting their return preparer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, particularly in our environment in a bigger city, be wary of street signs and social media claims and other advertisements that guarantee large refunds, right?
Right.
A preparer should always review your tax return with you to ensure you understand the contents of the tax return that they are preparing for you. Legitimate preparers are required to sign the tax return and provide you with a copy. As we listened from our colleagues in our processing divisions, it's important to keep records, so retain your copies for approximately 6 years to be prepared to answer any responses or questions from various federal, state, and local tax authorities.
Right. Okay, thank you for that information, John. I'm sure it will help taxpayers remain vigilant when selecting a preparer. And speaking of vigilance, identity theft, that's a major concern in today's digital age where Your personal information can be easily accessed and unfortunately misused. So, protecting yourself certainly requires awareness of the potential threats. Speaking from a perspective of tax return filing, what can I do to protect my identity? Is it possible to make myself identity theft proof?
Unfortunately, Jennifer, it is not.
Well, I had to ask, didn't I?
No one can make themselves identity theft proof with all the data that you mentioned has been breached and continues to be breached. However, there are actions you can take to protect your refund dollars. Establish a consistent pattern of filing year after year. You can benefit by providing your driver's license number on your electronically filed tax return and using the same bank account each year. Also, demand your paid preparer sign your name and credentials on your return.
That's really good information. It makes sense that consistency would be helpful, in protecting your refund. Now, what are some of the actions you would suggest I take to protect my tax information specifically?
So the number one suggestion is to make sure that taxpayers use mytax.dc.gov, the portal, right?
Yes.
To process their information, review their account information, and be able to even monitor potential fraud and identity theft as it relates to that information. Also, they need to retain documents, as I mentioned, for at least 6 years.
Sure.
And also dispose of old documents properly. I mean, we just don't want to throw them in the trash, right? We probably want to shred them or have them destroyed properly so fraudsters can't gain access to that information and use it for bad purpose.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad to hear that, taxpayers can rely on the MyTax portal to help protect their information. And now we're also aware of other things we can do to keep our information safe. I think disposing of documentation is really important. I'm one of those people that keep things forever. So it makes sense that, when you do dispose of things, that you do so properly. So thanks for that. Now, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. What is the recommended method for filing returns?
The recommended method would be to file your return electronically. As we've mentioned in prior discussions, it provides greater accuracy and allows OTR to process your return much more quickly than if we file paper or bring paper in to file in our walk-in centers.
Right. And what are the different ways you can file electronically?
Well, as I mentioned, you can file through the portal, right? You can also file with paper, mailing the paper in, and you can also bring your tax return in paper into our office in our walk-in center.
Okay. What about modernized electronic filing? Can you talk about that a little bit?
As far as the benefits or?
Sure, yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, the benefits are it allows OTR to more quickly validate your return, and particularly if you're expecting a refund, right? It enhances or increases the ability to process your return faster so you get your refund.
Right. And using modernized electronic filing, or MEF as they like to call it, you can file both your federal and your state return together, whereas on MyTax, you're just filing your district return, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, thanks for sharing information about that. And let's think about the things that we've discussed so far and address the elephant in the room. There's a fraudster attempting to steal my refund. What is the best thing I can do to prevent this from happening?
Well, the best thing is, as we say, establish a consistent pattern. Particularly try to file early. The sooner you can file your return, it mitigates the ability of fraudsters gaining information to try to file a false return using your identity or information before you do.
Right.
So that's really the best advice as far as consistency. We talked about, consistent information as far as bank account information from the prior year, address, those types of things that will allow the processing of the return to be much more quick.
Makes sense. Okay. Now, next we're going to delve into what you mentioned earlier, the Return Integrity Unit within Audit and Criminal Investigation. I see that the unit is responsible for engaging taxpayers when OTR needs more information to validate their refund claims, as you mentioned earlier. Now, can you talk a little bit about the correspondence that RIU sends and what taxpayers should do when they receive a letter from RIU?
Sure, absolutely. A customer should respond as soon as possible when they receive a notice from the RIU. If you don't respond to a notice, your refund will not be issued. Right? We want to make sure your interactions with our office is as painless and stress-free as possible. We have enhanced our OTR mytax.dc.gov portal to offer you a fast, easy, and secure way to provide information requested. Using the portal provides you with the greatest time savings and benefits. You can also register on mytax.dc.gov as far as an account.
Okay.
You don't necessarily have to use the account. Well, you don't use the account to respond to the RIU, but the account gives you much more tools to kind of track, your refund and kind of see the status and what information is out there.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about if my refund is selected for validation, right? I'm assuming that would increase the amount of time it would take to process and for me to receive my refund. Do you have any information on how much additional time would be added?
I think it's very important that we give clear expectations to taxpayers.
Absolutely.
When you file your return, the general expectation is that you should receive, if it's a refund return, within about 8 weeks, right? Unless, as we mentioned, it's selected for whatever reason as to validate some information on the return that's related to your refund or additional needed information or documentation to validate that refund. That process also involves notices to the taxpayer to ask for information to be submitted to do that process. And that could take up to 6 to 8 additional weeks to process.
Okay. All right. Now, I don't want to, as they say, give up the secret sauce, but I am going to ask the types of things that you might be asking for in the letter, just so listeners have an idea of what they should make sure they're including when they submit for a refund in the first place.
Generally, the additional information includes information as to your residency in D.C. I mean, we kind of live in an interesting area, right? The 3 jurisdictions. So as a result, there's a real need to validate that you are a resident of D.C. to get a refund from D.C., right? So the other is wage information, particularly W-2s, to make sure that they're accurate and that they can be validated.
Right.
And sometimes that's a challenge as it relates to employers, right? Not always do employers file with us their wage information timely.
Okay.
So as a result, that could necessitate contacting the taxpayer to validate that their wage income was correct.
Okay.
Those are the 2 biggest areas.
All right. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners. We do have some time left, so let's talk a bit about other things that you'd like to share with listeners, about how to protect their information in their return. Anything you'd like to reiterate that we talked about already today?
Sure. I kind of like to revisit what we talked about as to red flags in choosing a preparer.
Sure.
Tax preparers who claim that they can obtain larger refunds than the other preparer is truly a red flag, right?
Yeah.
Tax preparers who base their fee on a percentage of the amount of the refund, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Tax preparers who have inadequate due diligence in tax preparation. In other words, they're not really, checking the code or explaining to you why you're taking a certain deduction. And what's somewhat sad, I think, is the fact that a lot of these preparers are preying on, the citizens, the taxpayer.
Sure, your lack of knowledge and
lack
that
of
sort
knowledge,
of thing.
and the fact that, many people really need their refund quickly, right? For a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And they're entitled to that.
Absolutely.
So, and lastly, ghost preparers. Have you ever heard of ghost preparers?
No. Talk to
It's
me
not
about
Halloween, but what it has to do with that preparers are required to list a P-10 and sign the returns. But we have seen an increase in what we call ghost preparers. In other words, someone will come to you and say, hey, I'll prepare your tax return. I'll get half of your refund, or I'll make sure that you get the largest refund if you pay my fee of X amount of dollars, but they won't sign the return.
Right. Okay.
So you're responsible because it's your return. It's been submitted. If there are further questions, like from RIU or from audit or God forbid, even a criminal investigation related issue, it's your responsibility as a taxpayer.
Absolutely. And you said P10, so that's the preparer's tax identification number.
Yes.
And obviously a legitimate one would have that number, and that makes sense. Okay. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I think it takes a village, right? Because OTR is dedicated to provide gold standard customer service, protect the revenue of DC, and help taxpayers, navigate through the challenges sometimes of filing and paying their taxes, right? But it also takes taxpayers as part of good government to make sure that they kind of are aware of these warning signs as dealing with preparers, that they are responsible for, at the end of the day when they sign their return, that it's an accurate and factually correct return.
Right.
And that when they get inquiries, it's largely to protect both sometimes their identity as it relates to the proliferation of identity theft and some of their information being stolen to file a return in their name, and or to validate the fact that they're entitled to this refund based on maybe an inadvertent missing document in the return. I mean, frequently, people may have multiple jobs, right, in a year, and for whatever reason, they forget to include one of their W-2s.
Okay.
Inadvertently, right?
Sure.
But that would require sometimes a notice to the taxpayer to say, hey, we need you to substantiate this W-2. So just to understand the process, to use the tools that are available, particularly through the web portal, to be able to understand statuses and kind of what the expectation is to the taxpayer. They will get a notice, particularly if their refund is denied, the fact that they didn't provide documentation or the documentation didn't support the refund. And in those notices, it'll give them opportunities for additional, actions that they may take, including maybe filing a claim or a motion with Superior Court to contest that process.
All right. And the notices, do they go out both electronically and paper, or do you select how you want to receive your correspondence in your MyTax account? How does that work?
They go out by letter, by notice.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting in this day of scams and schemes, right? We also don't make phone contact with taxpayers.
That's important.
Unless they call in to ask to speak with our, customer service type representatives to ask questions or get guidance, or if they need to talk to, one of the supervisors as it relates to, an issue, particularly in their return. So if you get a call from someone who's purporting to be from OTR, that's a red flag.
Okay.
Don't provide them any information because that's not how we operate.
Understood. Okay. Now, this sounds like quite an undertaking, managing all of the validations that you have to perform during filing season. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of RIU. And, I imagine that you're quite busy during filing season, and maybe talk a little bit about what the rest of the year looks like for you. Is this something that's an ongoing thing in terms of validation? Are there peak periods, obviously, filing season, but are there any others?
Right. Well, filing season for us really starts now. Our preparation for next year's filing season based on kind of lessons learned from this year, things that we need to do or choose to do to improve the customer experience for the taxpayers. So once filing season is kicked off in parallel with the IRS in late January, our volumes really continue up and through June and even into August as it relates to the RIU process, sometimes to request information from taxpayers to validate, something on the return for their refund claim.
Okay. And speaking of lessons learned, is there anything new on the horizon? Do you have any plans for any enhancements to RIU's operation? Is there anything, that you learned that you think might be helpful if you make some adjustments to your process for the district residents?
Well, I think to answer that question, Jennifer, kind of twofold. One is that, we'll call it first-person fraud, or fraudsters always are coming up with new ways to kind of, cheat the tax system,
Sure.
right? So one of those ways is to utilize maybe false information on Schedule Cs.
Oh, okay.
To support, benefit claims, whether it's EITC or alike.
Mm-hmm.
These can be larger schemes perpetrated by individuals, or they can be individuals just trying, I'll say, to game the system.
Okay.
So I think taxpayers need to be aware that there's more vigilance being placed in looking at those issues as it relates to, obtaining your refund.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like caveat emptor, buyer beware in a sense,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Make sure what I said was make sure your return is accurate and
Right.
factually correct.
Right.
As far as things that we're looking to benefit them next year is we're really trying to look at ways to enhance through automation and our systems applications shorter turnaround times
Sure,
for
sure.
processing the returns. And
Right.
again, that's lessons learned from this year.
Absolutely.
Some of those issues.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to ask again if there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, anything else you think they should know, something that would benefit them specifically during filing season, or, at any point when it comes to protecting their information, protecting their refund, and making sure that, that their information is processed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, again, I say it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, we at OTR are here to serve the taxpayers, but we're also here to protect the fisc for DC. So it's kind of a balance.
Sure.
But we are very committed to providing, outstanding customer service for taxpayers who have questions or need additional assistance. We don't do this in a vacuum. I think you're probably learning through some of your discussions with other divisions. It's a collaborative effort,
Sure.
right? Whether
Yeah.
it's outreach efforts to educate the public as to responsibilities and certain kinds of issues as it relates to their returns, the need for EITC, and how many people really don't even claim it that really
Yeah.
need the EITC.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of flows through even to my division as it relates to validating their refunds,
Right. Right.
And that we're committed to do as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, if there's information that's missing or inaccurate or that appears to be involved in an identity theft scheme,
Sure.
we're here to protect the taxpayers,
Right.
but also to protect the fisc for the DC government.
Absolutely. I think that was an important point to make, that, maybe we can shift our thinking a little bit and not be bothered or annoyed when we receive a notice, but understand that it's you all making your best effort to protect us as taxpayers, our information, and the district at the same time. And I think that's what everyone would want. Thank you so much for sharing all of that valuable information with us and for sharing your insights today. And with that, we'll conclude today's episode. We want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our wonderful guest, John Fowler, for joining us during tax filing season and sharing important tips from ACI that will help protect your information and your refund. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we truly appreciate your time and your expertise. To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did, and that these tax tips will be of value to you. We're looking forward to bringing you another great episode, and we hope you'll join us next time. Until then, I'm Jennifer Valentine, and thanks for listening to Tax Talk DC.
Thanks for tuning in to Tax Talk DC with your host, Jennifer Valentine. For more information and resources, visit mytax.dc.gov.